We're about to dive into another episode of Running with Scissors, the podcast that helps you understand who and what you truly are in the world. Buckle up as we unpack strategies to unlock your full potential so you can stop running with scissors and get the most out of your life, work, and relationships. Let's go!
Yo, welcome back to Running with Skizzies. I just realized that I have lied to the people. Remember in the episode, last week's episode, I said, I'm going to fix the intro music before this episode.
I noticed that.
I was like, crap. I didn't fix it.
That's all right. At least it's not so overwhelming that you can't even hear what she's saying. But, at least you could see it says running with scissors. I still love that. And every time I talk about it outside in the real world, people love that reference because how many people feel that way? If you actually put it in front of them and says, do you feel like you're kind of running through life like you're running with scissors? Like at any moment you're going to fall and kind of completely deflate yourself or run out of energy or motivation to do anything or get anything done. Yeah. That's why it feels like I'm running through life, not only with scissors, but on eggshells at the same time. Craziness.
Yeah, not fun. I mean, maybe you could argue that I lacked motivation to change the music. Maybe is there a way we could fix that, like on today's episode?
Well, it's a prioritization thing, right? So
don't make me feel bad.
Well, here's the thing. There's a couple parts of you at play. The part of you that gets things done, right? And it doesn't care about timing and everything. It'll just get everything done all at once. But the other part of you that is strategic and sometimes a little bit laid back in nature will learn how to prioritize what is more important. At the end of the day, yes, I give you crap about it all the time, but what's more important, the music or the content?
Now I feel a little bit better. But yeah, also the part of me that gets things done is wiped out after the last 2 days. I'm just going to put that out there.
Yeah.
I've been building AI agents. I've been coding. I just told you that. I don't know even how to spell code, I don't think. And it's just, yeah, the music didn't get done. And guess what? I'll make this promise right now. We're going to record another episode after this, so it will not be done for next week's episode either. But eventually I will get to it.
Yeah. Again, there's so many things. And, we've been in the process of being as lean as possible to start creating the product for the people as opposed to for the inner teams. And so what that means is all of us are actually continuously choosing the most efficient path. If you reflect back on what we talked about in the last episode, many of us who have access to that perceptive, strategic, very precise trait are using it every single day now to be as efficient as possible to, getting our product, getting our functions and our artificial, our authentic intelligence up and ready for everybody to be able to benefit from, right? So it's okay.
And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about motivation, our motivators within the app, motivational drivers within the app.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll also dive into next episode. We'll probably talk about it and weave it through our authentic intelligence that Wei talked about, but we are going to do a whole deep dive on the next episode. So more to come on that. But motivational drivers within the app, most people only see 2. You can go watch the videos, read the reports, and learn about more. There are actually 12. So yesterday or last week, we talked about traits. There are 7 traits within the HumanOp technology. Now there are 12 motivational drivers. That sounds like a big episode, Wei. How are we supposed to get through this?
Well, I think the way to talk about that is that from our 20 years of research, well, more than 20 years now, what we found through understanding through the context of physical law, of physics and nuclear forces and everything like that, the part of human existence that impacts our motivational drivers has to do with the nuclear forces within our ecosystem that is operating every single day to maintain our physical presence, to our physical bodies, to make sure that we wake up every day and look the same that we did from the day before, basically. And so, yes, there's 12 potential motivational drivers that everyone has access to. that being said, what I love about, and I've always loved about this part of our technology, is that one of the biggest struggles most people have, especially those who are driven and ambitious and wanting to create success and happiness and everything in their lives, is how do I motivate myself to do the things or to get things done in the way that best supports me? And we bought into this this myth that motivation is something that we have to get. Well, what we found through our research is motivational drivers are operating every single day. And when we are not paying attention to that, we may be using the nuclear force drivers that are what I call nuclear force drivers, which is also motivational drivers, that are not in alignment or in conjunction to supporting our physical traits. So let me break that down real quick. We talked about our traits in the last episode, our physical traits. Built within each trait is a subset of nuclear force drivers that are like instrumental in maintaining the physical traits when you're showing up in the world, right? And so from that understanding, what we do in terms of using our nuclear force drivers and using that on a day-to-day basis is so important in helping us support our physical health as well as our ability to stay focused and have clarity of mind to make the best decisions in our lives. So when we say there's 12 motivational drivers, what we're saying is that out of those 12, there's only two, really. Two is all you need to master to get the most out of your vehicle of self, right? There's a pilot and a co-pilot driver. So if we go back to the vehicle metaphor that we use to help people understand your vehicle of self, like your car, there's the driver's seat and then there's shotgun. There's the pilot and then there's a co-pilot. What if I told you that if you want to access limitless motivation for the rest of your life, all you need to do is master feeding your motivational nuclear force drivers of your pilot and your co-pilot in the strength. And if you really want to make it easy for yourself, create a lifestyle where you're feeding those drivers in the strength every single day.
Sounds simple. We're going to break it down. Don't worry. But the important thing to remember is, as you're listening, all of this is in your app too. The specifics of how to feed your two prominent drivers, your pilot, your co-pilot. It's in there. It's in the results section. And then again, like I said, we'll probably hint at how to prompt high, but we're going to do a full episode on that, which is next week's episode. The next episode, however much or however fast you're binging these episodes, the next one in the queue is all about high. Okay, so I want to, before we dive in deep to motivational drivers, this always got me curious about the HumanOp technology versus other assessments. Most of them are behavioral, they're psychographics, they're subjective. This is kind of where those assessments live, right? Because it's really based on how the person behaves and shows up.
Right.
Am I crazy to say that, or can you just
No,
explain
not
the
at all.
overlap between the two?
No, you're absolutely right. When we observe human beings through the lens of the HumanOp technology, and without using the technology to start to kind of anticipate what their motivational drivers are, is through their behavior. Now, the tricky part is that if you don't understand the fundamental authentic traits that where your nuclear forces potentially could live, here's the challenge. Because human beings have been blending for centuries now, thousands of years, millions at this point, that has afforded us the ability to access almost every trait, but doesn't mean that there's enough access to give us energy when we're going there, like we were saying in the last episode. So what that also means is because every one of those motivational drivers lives in one or two or multiple traits. For example, the optimism driver, there's a driver called optimism, and that one only lives in that gaseous trait called effervescent. It doesn't live in any other trait. So the reality is that if someone doesn't have authentic access to the effervescent trait, that means pushing them to be driven by optimism, right? To be lit up by optimism is a losing endeavor. They can pretend, right? They can be taught and trained to behave in a way that looks like they're optimistic, but every time they do, it's going to exhaust them. It's going to make them tired, which is not an optimal use of their vehicle of self. Does it make sense?
Absolutely. So then, as we dive in, there are strong states and weak states. We'll go through both of them. Give me the high level of what that means in terms of either giving you energy or draining your energy.
Yeah, great question. So if you go back to chemistry or physics, when we learn about nuclear forces, right, in general, and we learn about half-life and decay and all those different things, we notice that in the world of molecules and molecular interactions and energetic ATP conversions, all the jazz, okay? I'm just throwing out random terms, but those of you who know, you know.
I just want to put out for those of you who don't know, I too went to public school, so me and you we're on the same boat. But go ahead, Wei, please.
I went to public school too, I think. But anyway, so nuclear force in nature, there's always what we call a strong state expression and a weak state. Okay. For example, in atomic theory, there's a strong, powerful way to use atomic interactions that happens between molecules. And just like anything else in the world, what we see in the real world as an example of this is like gunpowder can be used in a strong way or in a weak way, right? It can be used in a way that could be productive, or it can be used in a way that's destructive. And what we're saying that within each and every single one of our personal motivational driver combinations, there is a strong state of expression, which we tend to see is the most optimal behavior pattern that comes through from the activities of feeding your drivers in the strength. And that's what we're talking about. There are certain activities that you will do that will feed that driver in the strength and elevate that and give you energy. But at the same time, those nuclear force driver have a weak state expression. Typically, what we see that is when someone is hungry, angry, lonely, tired, a very popular acronym called HALT that is popular in the addiction community, which is when people are hungry, angry, lonely, tired, they tend to lean towards compensatory behaviors that typically feed your same motivational drivers in the weak state. And so that's why when we talk about motivational drivers and help people understand that these drivers need to be fed every single day, if you're paying attention and you're cognizant and you're aware of what those are, you can master making sure that you are always feeding your drivers in the strength or doing the best you can to do that and minimize the default sometimes of just grabbing potato chips. You know, it's like sometimes when you have a choice to eat and you're hungry, you can go grab organic food or clean food that'll help your system, your ecosystem become or stay healthier. Or you can still get full grabbing a big old bag of greasy potato chips, and you will get full, but what's going to happen to your ecosystem? Not so good, right? Same concept here with motivational drivers. So the thing, what I want to help people understand and move away from is that motivation is not something that you go and say, I need to get motivated. So it's more so about you haven't been feeding your motivational drivers in the strength, and that's why you feel a depletion in energy right now. And the concept of getting motivated is actually code for I need to do activities or engage in activities that will actually feed my motivational drivers in the strength. How you know you have been able to do that, if you've ever had a day where you were engaging in activities all day long and not once did you feel hungry. And by the end of the day, you said, holy cow, I haven't eaten all day, but you haven't felt hungry. Why? Because it has to do with energy. See, when we eat food, it converts it to energy so that we can actually function. Well, guess what? When you are engaging in activities that feed your natural motivational drivers of your pilot and your co-pilot drivers that you see on your core stats in the strength, and you do it effectively, because there are some activities that feed it better than others. And if you, let's say you do the most optimal activities that feed your drivers in the strength all day long, you too will not feel hungry. These are the days where you wake up with this and go end the day with the same amount of energy that you started the day with. That's when you know that you've been engaging activities all day long that has sufficiently fed your motivational nuclear force drivers in the strength.
Yeah, it's a great example. It's cool to see that there's actually science behind it, and you can repeat it. I was actually at a conference probably 3 months ago at this point, and one of the presenters was talking about how to get into flow state, how to sustain your energy. And this is kind of the first thing that popped in my head was if you just knew it was way easier than whatever concoction you're putting together about the 52 things you need to do to get into a
Right.
flow state. I'm like, wow, I should give you this app. But really, it is repeatable, and it's sustainable too. That's the other thing with when people get into a flow state, I find that they're exhausted after it. But when you are feeding your drivers and you're doing things in alignment with you, so not when I'm coding things, those things you could do all day long.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and that's why we talk about the pros and cons of being human. Human beings are just amazing machines because we all have natural access to pretty much all the potential traits and drivers. That means we have the ability to be able to learn just about anything, but it doesn't mean we should do what we learned, right? That's the pros and cons and double-edged sword of being an amazing human being, or just being a human being in general, is that we can be taught and trained to do anything. Okay, the other side, the con of that, we can be taught and trained to do anything, but it doesn't mean we should do it. And what we're looking to do is, and bless their hearts, everybody who goes out there with their system that are based on anecdotal or life events and their experiences, I guarantee for the subset of human beings that are just like them, it's perfect. It's great, right? Because they lived it, they experienced it, and they can speak authentically to it. What we want to help people understand is that, but not everybody's, like I'd say, cut from the same cloth, right? I mean, parents and children can be so different that they can't even be in the same room together without triggering each other by nature, right?
Reach. Just saying.
And it's a cruel societal and cultural and familial expectation that just because you are blood related, that you have to get along, that you have to be able to mend things and get things over. And what happens is it contributes to a lifetime of fatigue, And I'm not saying this so that we can break families apart, but just to create a deeper understanding of how to honor the unique differences, that just because, you gave birth to these kids doesn't mean they're going to be exactly like you. Right.
You actually told me a story. I don't know if you want to share this or not, but about you and your dad. Now, we're skipping a little bit to alchemy here, but you guys respect that boundary, and you have a great relationship because of it. Is that, I mean, that's what you're talking about, right?
Well, more so my mom than my dad. My dad is actually, for a long time, his alchemy was closer to mine. And when we get to alchemy, we can talk about that.
Yeah.
That's the number one, so something to look forward to. Alchemic incompatibility is the number one reason why most relationships of any kind, personal business, become challenged, right? My mother and I are the furthest apart. My alchemy is, on the periodic table that we have to kind of measure it all, is amongst the most, the higher, more refined alchemy. My mom is on the lower side, and our entire lives have been contentious in a sense, to a point where my sister and my dad were saying they fight over the most ridiculous things, and we've always seen it, right? Like, there are people who are like, they get into a squabble and they get to a spat about the most inane, nonsensical things, right? Well, that's because it isn't about what the context of the argument is. It's the fact that by nature, alchemically, there is a fatigue state that's going on just by proximity, right? See, when we are able to reconnect our understanding of ourselves as human beings to nature, we start to realize that a lot of the challenges we have with each other in a relational standpoint is not because of the context of what the challenge is. It's nature at work, right? The same thing can be said for nuclear force motivational drivers. You look in the world of chemistry where there's molecules and different type of elements and everything. There are some elements, if we go back to chemistry, we remind ourselves about ionic bonding and covalent bonding, and there are different types of bonding. Okay, for those who need a little refresher, ionic bonding means there's two molecules that come together. It's energetic. Okay, there's an energy that holds the two molecules together, or two particles together. Covalent bonding means the molecules come together, but they share electrons to create a covalent bond. So if you think about that, in nature, and even in human beings, sometimes there's a vibe bond that's cool, but there's not a lot of shared ideas or thinking. They can't really hold a conversation, but there's a chemistry that's there. But then there's also types of bonding where they have shared thoughts, they have shared interests and everything like that. So what we see on the molecular level, we forget that it still ramps up to show up in the human level. And all we've done is help people understand, like, if you understand your nuclear force motivational drivers, you and your traits and the positive and negative polarities that live in all of that, we can help you understand what types of people you can have either just an ionic bond, a covalent bond of shared thoughts, or both even, right? And what we want to look for is people who want to optimize relationships of business or personal or team dynamics. What you want to look for is a healthy combination of both the ionic type of bonding and the covalent type of bonding, right? And it starts with, because here's the thing, if a human being is not optimized and they're like not really spinning properly or not really putting out the right frequency and energy, it all starts with how well are you feeding your nuclear force drivers. One of the things about motivational drivers is this, is like, if you think about it for yourself, right? How many times, if you're listening to this, how many times have you found yourself unable to focus, clouded in thought, clouded in thinking, and everything like that, and then realizing that part of that reason is because you're just exhausted. You don't have the bandwidth or the energy. How many times have we used that? I don't have the bandwidth or energy to be able to focus right now. What that is code for is what we say is like, well, you're obviously not doing things that are feeding your drivers in the strength, because when you don't feed your drivers in the strength, your body still needs to feed. So it starts to grab other nuclear forces in your ecosystem to try to feed it, to try to get energy. And if you're grabbing the wrong nuclear forces to feed because you're not mastering your focus on your pilot and your co-pilot drivers, that's when the voices start to get really high. And this is when people turn to excessive happy hours, alcohol, drugs, ideations of leaving the planet, all those different things. I've seen it over and over and over again. And the simplest way that we kind of help people kind of eliminate all that, feed your nuclear force motivational drivers, feed them in the strength. Get masterful at that. People ask all the time, like when you watch the movie The Matrix, right? One of the first things that Morpheus was teaching Neo after he disconnected from the Matrix is like, what do you need to do? What do I need to learn? Jump off this building, follow me. And he kept doing it and kept falling, kept doing it and kept falling. Okay. They shortcut it in the movie, but in reality, he probably was there for a really long time. Probably got tired. It's like, I keep jumping off the building. I keep falling down to the ground. So when people say, God, wait, there's so much information. I go to the app, I take the assessment, and believe me, we pared back a lot. And then said, like, there's so much, I don't even know where to go, right? What should I do first? And this is what for most people, this is what I say. If you just get masterful at feeding your nuclear force drivers of your pilot and your co-pilot drivers in the strength, I guarantee your life will completely change. Level of focus, level of prosperity flow, abundance, your ability to make the best decisions in your life, and just feeling more motivated and energized. Want to tap into limitless motivation? Feed your drivers in the strength every single day, all day long.
Yes. Let's do that. Actually, we've seen a couple of cool examples of that with past clients and attendees of our retreats in a really short period of time. So doesn't even have to take 90 days. We're just saying, take the first 90 days and focus on it. I'm so glad you brought us back to motivational drivers. I think this was the technology hard at work, both myself and Wei. Very high effervescent traits. And you know what? Tangents happen, and that's okay. But he brought it back. You're awesome. You're grounded. Maybe I'm not. That's okay. But let's go through them. Let's talk about the 12. I would love to roll through them so people can kind of hear what they are and then reference the app, of course, recognizing what that looks like in the strong state, what it looks like in the weak state, so we're aware of it. And then how do we feed that? If it's our authentic pilot or co-pilot, a quick 1 or 2 things we can do to feed it. And then next episode, like I said, we'll go in depth on how to prompt high so you can get way more information than just this podcast episode. Mm-hmm. So you tell me, where do we start? Top to bottom, left to right? There's a lot of these things to go through.
Well, if I was to look behind the raw data, let's just go left to right in terms of what the technology generates on the back end. One of the first nuclear force drivers is called initiating change, right? Which is all about creating change in the world, but not just creating change on a minuscule level. We're talking about transformational change, okay? In the strong state of this particular driver is the ability to initiate change, but not only that, what feeds it the most is observing the transformation that happens. So we see a lot of people who do things like, for example, landscaping or to doing remodeling type of work, things that will tear things down and rebuild it up into something that's completely transformed. We see a lot of people who do that type of work be driven by this particular driver, okay? Now, what triggers this driver and puts it into the weak state, okay? Because there are certain scenarios that are put into the weak state, and then the behaviors start to show up, and it's called volatility. Now none of the all the weak states, the way we describe it, the words that we use to describe it tend to be charged words, okay? And we did that on purpose. The descriptions of those are charged words because we want to make sure that you remember not to stay there. So if you start to observe yourself being a little volatile, I mean, let's just say, okay, volatile, which is basically being angry, okay?
Would
But
you
not
say a
being,
little punchopotamousy?
yeah, punchopotamousy. Yeah. When I get a little punchy, it's because this particular driver this nuclear force driver only lives in the energetic trait. And because it only lives there, it's all about crusading for justice. And right, the confrontational side lives in this particular driver. It comes from this driver, and it only lives in that trait. So if you have like when I had a client that had anger management issues in the beginning, before we were able to kind of manage that and help him understand that, he had a pretty high volume in this initiating change, right? And oftentimes what pisses people off on that level is because they feel like they're in like this loop of things not changing, or they're not observing. It's like, once again, this is happening. Once again, this is happening again. Okay. When people have anger issues, that's typically what's going on. So if you see somebody now with this understanding that is flying off the handle, ready to punch a hole in the wall, what that basically is saying, there's some part of them that is perceiving things as, here we go again, that something is not changing to the, or transforming, and it's like a repetition of things, right? It's so fascinating when I was getting deep and learning about this technology. I was like, it's that simple. And then I think about all the times when I got angry, because I do have access to the energetic trace, so I'll have potential access to this, right? And I was like, oh my God, this is so right. I'm frustrated because once again, this happened. I'm frustrated again. And then it just escalates into being just straight up anger. And I said, okay, I get it. So that's one of those nuclear force. So one of the things, if you happen to have this drive, if you look in your app and you say, hey, I have initiating change too, it's very important that you have activities that has observable transformational results, right? Or making sure that if you are creating those results, that you take a pause and observe and give yourself credit, or take ownership of the fact that you facilitated this transformation of results, right? And then if that's still not happening for you, and you find yourself going into the weak state of this driver, there's another driver. You have another driver. You might as well, you can always feed that one. And that's kind of like the cool mastery piece, right? If you're in a dynamic or circumstance that makes it really difficult to feed the driver that is being triggered right now in the strength, guess what? You have a co-pilot. Jump to your co-pilot. Or if you haven't been trying to do, if you're triggered by a co-pilot, go to your pilot, right? Some of us have backseat drivers. Then in a pinch, you could go with a tertiary backseat driver, right? That's not currently illuminated in the consumer public app, but it's actually in our Maestro app, which is the business side of things for team management and team optimization. Okay.
Yeah, that might be a HumanOp app 2.0, a little bit more advanced. We'll work on the basics. We'll talk about your tertiary drivers in a later episode.
HumanOp Authentic Intelligence can probably help you with that if you give it the right prompt, right?
Ooh, what a tease.
Yeah.
All right, that's initiating change.
The next one is creating order.
Yes.
Pretty straightforward. those who are driven by this, when they're able to create systems, processes, depending on the volume, living life in a routine fashion. So you have something that morning, noon, and night, you always have a specific, plan in place. Being able to create order, something as simple as organizing your drawers or putting dishes away, organizing your closet. Those of you who have creating order, if you look at your core stats and you say, I have creating order, just pay attention now. See, a lot of this stuff shouldn't be new to you. Okay. It should be like, oh, no wonder when I do those things, I feel better. Now I could strategically use it to feel better, even though there's just putting stuff away and organizing things, you wouldn't think that will actually get me energized. But because if you have creating order and you start organizing things, like you should see my desk. Whenever I have time, I'll just organize things in an orderly fashion on my desk, put things away that needs to be put away, so that when I look at it, it actually energizes me, right? So it's these little subtle things. Now, for people with creating order, chaos is not your friend. And the weak state of creating order is called manipulation. Now, like I said, it's a charged word, and it's not like you're being malevolent or anything like that. Manipulation is basically as simple as saying something to somebody, so some external situation, so that their response will help you create order. What that means is you're pawning off creating order, the responsibility of creating order, to somebody else to create order for you. That, even though it may seem like it's creating order in your life, because you're, some might think that's delegating, but the reality is it's actually going to take energy away from you to just get someone to do that. Parents do it all the time. Like, if you don't do your homework right now, then you won't get this later. Or on the positive side, if you finish your homework by 4:00, I'm going to make sure you get your favorite dessert tonight. It's like, ooh, okay. It may seem innocuous, may not seem like it's just any skin, off your back, but imagine doing this all day long. Eventually you will be exhausted, because it's the weak state of that, right?
So even those statements are going to compile throughout the course of the day and drain you of energy?
Yeah, because the energy required to think about that, create that, and manipulate the external factor so that their response will give you a sense of order. That's the weak state expression of creating order versus creating order without the reliance on an external factor. Like, you yourself are creating the order.
Yeah. That's cool. All right. So I'll give the example on this one because it just happened this morning. Sean, who, again, if you're listening, you haven't met yet, but you will soon. He called me. He's in a funk right now. There was a death in the family, and he needed a little pick me up. And his creating order is one of his pilot drivers. I think it's actually tied with optimism for him. So he said he was walking by his kid's room. It was a disaster. He went in, cleaned it up. He said it was the most organized it's ever been since they've ever moved in that house. And now he's got energy for the rest of the day. He keeps walking by the room to just look at it and smile. He's fed his driver. It's that simple. He's crazy, but he fed his driver.
Yeah. Yeah. And now he has the energy to do the things that he wants to do.
Yeah.
Or needs to do to move the needle forward, so to speak. Right.
Precisely. All right, moving on. We got a lot to get through. What's next?
The next one is creating protection. I'll just say right now, this nuclear force driver is very popular among the military, first responders, people who are out there creating protection in the world. Because what literally feeds this drivers is making sure that all contingencies and all factors are accounted for. The I's are dotted, the T's are crossed. A lot of people in like insurance industries that are actuaries that kind of like look for all the mistakes, the E&Os and everything like that. A lot of them, if they have creating protection, they're actually really good at it because they will make sure that everything is covered, right? When I have my insurance
I don't know
brokerage
if you knew this or if you've studied this, but Italian mothers always have this, usually in the weak state. I'm just going to put that out there. I come from one. I can say that with confidence.
Right. So yeah, there are certain cultures in the world, just over time, where they've nurtured that, because this creating protection lives in a variety of different traits. It doesn't just live in one trait, right? It lives in that energetic crusader, fight for justice, right? And so those are the military people that will go out there and protect others, right? This also lives in, like, for example, the sympathetic trait, which is where, like, like, the nurturing, protective mama bear type of dynamic lives. And so they're creating protection for the ones they love and care about, right? It also lives in the other doing trait that we talked about in the last episode called the romantic trait, where it's all about protection of self. Okay, because it's a very solitary, reclusive trait. So depending on what traits are natural for you and authentic for you, if you have access to this creating protection, it's going to show up differently, right? Kind of like the nuclear force is like the speaker, but depending on the design of the speaker box, the sound or the expression is going to be different, right? Now, creating protection, when there is a lack of protection or a sensation that something isn't safe or doesn't feel safe, it will drop into the weak state, especially if they feel like they can't create the protection necessary. And the weak state is literally what happens when you don't feel like you are safe. It has to do with fear. Okay, but it's often it shows up in a form of panic, right? So people who authentically, and so here's the thing, the key word here, for those who authentically struggle from anxiety or panic attacks, more often than not, it's because they're operating in the weak state of this driver. Now, I know I'm going to get a lot of flack for this, all right, because I have before, of talking about authentic and inauthentic anxiety, authentic or inauthentic panic attacks. Here's the thing, is that the medical industry is so good at marketing its stuff that we can literally sell people into believing. I remember when I went to learn psychology and I took psychology and everything like that, I was going through the book and it sold me that I had every malady or every issue that was in the book. I was like, holy cow, I have a little bit of that. I have a little bit of that. God, I'm totally messed up. Right. And maybe I still am. But the whole point is that's why we want to talk about objectively that there is an authentic way. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with inauthentic. It just means you subscribe to a belief system that has allowed you to learn how to be anxious or have anxiety or anything like that when it's inauthentic. Remember, the pros and cons of being human. We can learn to behave in any way we want, right? If we are convinced of doing so. So what happens is if you have authentic access to the creating protection and you find yourself panicking or in a state of anxiety, just know that, ask yourself this question. What is it that I don't feel safe about at this moment? And then do something about it. And then watch your anxiety go away. And if you don't know what to do about it, just ask Hai, and Hai can give you some steps that you can do to get that handled.
Which we'll get to, I promise.
Which we'll get to, right.
Are you challenging the entire medical industry right now? Are we going out on a limb and saying, challenge every diagnosis by downloading our app first? I said
what we're saying is that we want to empower people to not just be sheep. I want every human being to be self-empowered, to be able to at least objectively understand why things are happening the way they are, right? I think so many times right now we've skipped that first step of why is this even happening and just go right to throwing everything in the kitchen sink at something to fix something because someone told us that this is what it is. But if we don't ask ourselves, empower ourselves with the knowledge and understanding of why we're there to begin with, or why this is existing to begin with, getting to what we call the root cause of why this is all happening, we're missing a vital step of sustainably and permanently eliminating challenges in our life. This is why people, a lot of us, me included, have recurring issues because it's not always fun trying to get to the root cause and answering that question, why? So again, it goes back to, part of, really effective marketing is getting people to not have to do the heavy lifting of figuring out why, be spoon-fed as to why things are the way they are for them. And it's like, oh my God, that totally makes sense. Just because it makes sense doesn't mean that's actually what it is, right? Because that's only satisfying one communication style that we identified, which is intellectual center. But if your instinctual center, your gut, your emotional, what you're feeling, and then where your body is moving towards is not what logically makes sense, then just because it makes sense doesn't mean it is. That's why it is. You just been convinced intellectually, logically, that this is probably why you're feeling what you're feeling. And because you're seeking a solution and you don't know the answer, and someone in a white coat tells you something and you say, oh, he must be right. He's so smart. I'm dumb. This is what we want to empower people to stop saying that, thinking that way, or defaulting to the fact that just because someone went to school longer than they have, that they are smarter than them.
Yeah, Wade just admitted he went to public school just like me, so maybe maybe there's something to it. But seriously, here's my challenge then. If you were ever told something by someone wearing a white coat that maybe just doesn't feel 100% right, go download the app, get a second opinion, a free second opinion, no white coats needed.
Yeah.
But
and white coat,
anyway.
by the way, is a metaphor. Okay. It's like the metaphor of someone that you perceive to be of a position of authority, which then allows them to bypass a lot of your critical factors so you can immediately trust them.
We weren't actually talking about talking white coats, because now I'm confused. I really thought we were talking about white coats. Okay, moving on. Monetary discernment.
So
That
monetary
sounds fun.
discernment is another favorite of mine. It's one of my backseat drivers, actually. We call it the money gene. Why? Did you know that there's a nuclear force driver that exists in certain human beings that gives them an innate understanding of how money works? Money being a representative of flow being representative of nature. That's inflow and outflow, right? You need rain and water in order for things to thrive, right? But then you need the water to evaporate so things don't rot. So it's like inflow and outflow. People with this driver called monetary discernment are naturally inclined and drawn and even sometimes motivated by money, but not so about money itself, but about what money represents. The energy of money represents exchange, in with the new, out with the old type of dynamic, right? So those who have this as a driver often find themselves lit up and energized by donating old things and replacing it with new things, right? Taking money to invest in things so that they have a return on that. Having them work in the areas of finance really lights them up, because they understand, not from the fact that, I'm making a bunch of money, but more so being able to facilitate the flow of money in and out, right? Oftentimes, people with monetary discernment love observation of when things are flowing in a smooth way in and out of certain dynamics, right? Now, the weak state of this, when the flow dynamic isn't observed, it's kind of like the weak state doubles down on that, right? When things don't flow, instead of like saying, oh, we should fix that, the weak state then doubles down and say, okay, let's stop all flow. And that's when we call it gluttony or hoarding, right? Again, charged words. But what that looks like is holding on to thoughts, emotions, things, all these different dynamics. The most common way it shows up for people who have an authentic access to the monetary discernment is worrying about money. Is an easy kind of like indicator that you are in the weak state of this driver. Now, remember, we talked about authentic and inauthentic. Can you learn to be driven by money and worried about money inauthentically? 100%. Why? Because we live in a capitalistic world that is distorted beyond all measure. So what happens is people buy into this belief that they need to be driven by money. They need to be motivated by money. And what happens is that if it's not an authentic driver for you to do that, it will continuously throttle you into the weak state expression of worried about money, worried about money, worried about money, which will exhaust you versus motivate you.
So I'm thinking of every single guru out there who pushes their sales program and their courses, and there's probably a couple that just popped into your head. Go with it. This probably triggers the crap out of you when you see that, because we don't all have this flow, this money gene.
Right. And that's why you see in those camps, it's not 100%, 90, 80, or even 70% success rate. There's just a small subset of individuals. And that's why they always have to have this disclaimer that just because you see this testimony, it doesn't guarantee your results, right? Because you have to make sure that, do you follow the same driver set or the same physical design even? I mean, one of the things that you could start doing is that before you decide to kind of, outside of us, because the way we design our things, it's not about how we do things, it's about how that person does. So everybody has a unique experience in any of our dynamics, whether it be our app, our experiences, our workshops, any of that stuff. But if you go to someone who doesn't use this technology and you look at how they show up in the world physically and what their areas of refinement, check in with yourself. You have the app. You can compare yourself to them and see, do I have what they have? Right? If I don't, chances are they're appealing to a subset of human beings that are most similar to them. And if you don't show up similar to them, then sure, you can invest the money, but your results may not be as similar to what they're getting. Right?
Yeah, this is going to be, I mean, there's so much around this one. It only lives authentically in the perceptive trait, with a rare exception that we won't necessarily get into here. But I would say prompt high on this one. See if
Yeah.
you have authentic access to it, because all of those people, I mean, you mentioned it. We live in a capitalistic society. Money and talking about getting money, hoarding money, having money. I mean, it motivates people to do things, and I've seen it get people into really bad situations.
Right.
So my suggestion is go ask Hi what your relationship with this driver is,
Yep.
and what let's do that. Let's make a note of this now. Well, let's have a
It's a
specific
really
prompt in
simple
the next
question.
episode. Let's do it now.
Do I have authentic access to the monetary discernment driver? Ask Hi that, and Hi will tell you whether
Yeah.
or not you have authentic access to that based on your traits.
Mhm.
So if you want to get even more specific, again, this is like prompt engineering for Hi, right? Based on my traits, do I have authentic access to the monetary discernment driver? And allow Hi to kind of give you that feedback and tell you exactly what the answer is. And that way you can start to kind of make better choices in terms of what truly motivates and drives you. I had a client that had a $10 million plus company, international company. Everybody thought, oh, he must have monetary discernment as a driver. He's so wealthy, blah, blah, blah. He didn't. He had compassion and creating protection as his drivers. What drove him to make so much money was to take care of the people in his organization and his family and make sure they were always safe. And that's what drove him day in, day out to continue to grow his organization, because he calibrated that as his focus.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool reframe. Money wasn't the focus. It was the
Money was
byproduct.
not the focus. And everybody
Beautiful.
thought, oh yeah, he must love money. And they're like, no, money did not motivate him at all. He was the first to always donate, go to nonprofits, write a check, not even at a drop of a hat, just write a check. Boom, here, let me donate. Boom, here's $2,000, here's $5,000, here's $10,000. I took him to a fundraising event. He wasn't even sure what he was donating to, but he just was doling out cash whenever they asked for it. He goes, here's a check, and kept giving to his son to like bring it up.
So disclaimer, this is not financial advice either.
No,
maybe don't do that either.
yeah, but it was interesting because everybody, who in our world, like, oh, he must have monetary discernment. I mean, look at him, he's like, I was like, no, actually, it's one of the lowest drivers for him. He is so not motivated by money. But that's why we said, when you feed your driver, so many amazing things happen. The level of abundance that you can incur in your life simply by doing that, as long as you calibrate and build a lifestyle with that focus. So the byproduct of you feeding your drivers will bring in the necessary resources and tools, such as money, to continue to help you kind of expand and step into that purpose of why you're here.
I love it. All right. Number 5, visionary driver. Moving on. What do we got?
Okay. So the visionary driver, we call this, this is a very interesting driver. This driver only lives in the romantic trait, which is that other doing trait that is kind of reclusive by nature. We call it visionary because we also call this the genius driver. Historically, if you look throughout history and everything like that, and if you understand the physical attributes of what we're looking for, there's a common baseline foundational set of characteristic traits that we can see and observe, where the geniuses of humankind, they have access to this driver. Okay, this driver is responsible for some of the most genius creations humankind has ever had. What feeds this driver in the strength is the maintaining of a swing. Okay, so if you don't have access to this, this won't make any sense. If you do have access to this visionary driver, those who have access to this driver, their mind is constantly in motion. In fact, the kind of motion that it has is kind of a swinging motion. And what the swinging is doing is swinging itself outside of the box of what the framework of the world that everybody lives in, to grab ideas that are out of the box, swing back in, and it swings back to the other side and grabs it from the other side. What are those two sides? Light and dark. Those with the visionary driver, unlike the effervescent that also gets a lot of brilliant ideas, visionary driver does not discern between light and dark. They just grab whatever ideas. And though the ideas may make sense to them, what makes them visionaries is that their ideas oftentimes won't make sense to anybody else. And some of the biggest challenges those with the visionary driver have growing up is being called crazy. Okay. And what that does, because it comes from the one of the most gentle traits on the planet, they tend to be a little bit more sensitive. And so being called that often drives them to believe that, which then throttles that visionary driver into the weak state. And what happens in the weak state, the swing is no longer like a grandfather clock swing, which is normal. It starts to swing higher, faster, and it starts to loop. The word that we use to describe the weak state of the visionary driver is called manic. And so if you think about manic thinking, that is out of the box, right? And that's why I say historically through time, that's why people say, oh, I don't have access to romantic trait. I think I'm pretty romantic. It's not modern day romanticism. You got to think back to the romantic era and what was most prevalent: art, creativity, genius progenitoring of all these different things that have stood the test of time, right? So there's an angsty darkness to that particular trait and this driver, right? And so when it's not optimized, that's when you start to see some really manic type of dynamics. And so one of the best ways that I found over the years for people who have access to this visionary is recognizing you will never stop swinging, which means you'll never have ideas stop. Because one of the fears that a lot of people who are the visionary driver will have is like, I have to keep it all in my head because otherwise it will stop. And they're afraid of the ideas that will stop coming in. Actually, they will never stop coming in. And they will actually hemorrhage. And so the hemorrhaging will cause a spin. So what you want to do is find an outlet that you consistently go to, whether it be recording to AI or journaling. You know, I have a lot of clients who just auto write and they just let themselves go, whether it be writing or doodling or whatever the case may be, depending on what kind of creative spin you have within your ecosystem. But that is one of the best ways to manage that swing. You know, it reminds me of a time when I was doing IT and I went to a client's house. And I kept hearing this back and forth knocking. And I was like, what is happening here? And then it's like, oh, that's the clock over there. I was like, it was one of those grandfather clocks, right? I said, but why is it knocking? He says, I don't know. There's something going on with the winding system, which I eventually fixed. But what it was is that the pendulum was swinging so hard, it was creating grooves on either side of the case. And it was like, dum, dum, dum. I was like going, and you're just living with that? But this is what happens. That's literally what happens and this person was pretty genius too. So it was like, oh, you're metaphorically demonstrating what's going on in your head. But that's what happens is when you are not allowing yourself the outlet and you're not recognizing and acknowledging the fact that, hey, not all your thoughts are going to be understood by everyone. And that's okay. That's how you manage the spin, is you allow yourself the outlet to kind of be able to get that out so it stops knocking against the side of the grandfather clock. Okay. That would be the visionary driver.
Yeah, I remember when we were in Scottsdale a few months ago and we had dinner with Ken, our friend Ken Moskowitz, shout out to him. He has both the romantic trait and presumably this driver as well, because he's done some of the most creative ad campaigns in the world. And if you're listening or watching, yes, you've seen them. I promise. Believe me. And I remember him, like he kind of sat back in his chair and he felt validated because he admitted he had been called crazy in his life because he has these crazy ideas but he's very well optimized. I mean, he writes them down. He has his outlets. But the one thing I remember him saying was he makes a point to not judge his ideas because there are the light ones and there are the dark ones. I'll let him tell the story about the potential name for a pizza shop that he came up with, but it's very dark. Let's just say that. But he didn't judge it. He wrote it down and he had fun with it. And that's him feeding his driver. So I can see how this driver could be triggered very easily because the rest of the world would never understand what came out of his mouth for the name of this restaurant.
Yeah. If the rest of the world started to understand those who have access to this, I think humanity would evolve not only on a technological level, but on a creative level so much faster, led by the visionaries, that are supported by this. Right now, that driver and that trait, for that matter, are one of the most unsupported, misunderstood components of humanity today. And that's what drives a lot of these individuals, because it's so reclusive, it's all about self. It drives them into those compensatory behaviors, drugs, alcohol, ideations of leaving the planet, all those different things, very internalized, right? Ken literally created a lifestyle and a career that allowed him constant expression, so it doesn't hemorrhage in his head.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. And all by chance, really. He just naturally went with what felt right. We're giving you the tools to identify it and do that for yourself. Okay, we're moving on. Optimism. Let's go to the fun driver.
Yep. Again, like I said, optimism only lives in the effervescent trait. And so that means, like, our culture, our cheerleader, rah-rah culture that pushes everybody, you need to be more optimistic. Well, it depends. If that person doesn't have access to the effervescent trait, telling them to be optimistic is like telling them you need to go suck on gas or something like that. It's like
it was a weird metaphor.
I know, it didn't make any sense. It started to come out and I lost it. So that's the nature of the effervescent trait. I have a really large number there. So effervescent trait, those of you who have it, you'll notice like that. Ideas will come in, and if you don't capture it and nail it down quick enough, it will literally evaporate mid-sentence. And that's literally what happened. But I have optimism as a driver as well, which is all about having fun, making fun, the possibilities of things. And thus I created a lifestyle where I get to work with human beings and humanity all day long to show them and highlight and create strategies on the best possibility of their life. And that by nature feeds my driver all day long, right? Optimism is all about when you're around other people who are also have the optimism driver or are positively charged and talking about the possibilities of things. Those with the optimism driver, it is critical that you keep on your speed rack in a bar or on your utility belt, a Batman, your silver lining playbook. Okay, I would never leave home without it, because life will continue to happen, crap will happen. And if you are driven by optimism, and optimism one of your drivers, and you don't have that silver lining playbook with you, life becomes really, really hard. If your career isn't fun, if what you're doing for a living doesn't inspire you day in, day out, you will burn out if optimism is your driver. So whenever I see someone with a really high volume of optimism in a driver, I always tell them, it says, hey, make sure what you do every day in your work, in your career, is fun and inspiring to you, because and every time I say this to somebody, they just nod their head. It's like, yep. And it's not a nice to have for someone with the optimism driver. Is a critical thing that you make choices in life that is fun and inspiring, especially when it comes to the work that you do every single day. A lot of people, like I remember my dad when I was younger, it's like a job is sometimes you just have to do what you have to do, whether or not you like it. I was like, ew. Not realizing that what he said triggered my optimism. Like, there's no way I'm going to do that. And if you look at my career and how I got to where I am today, you'll see, like, I tried anything and everything under the sun because, like, ooh, that looks fun. Let me go try that. That's not fun anymore. Let me go do something else. Oh, that looks fun. That's not fun anymore. Let me go do something else. Right now, because it's so fun and lighthearted and loving and and lighthearted by nature, and it only lives in that gaseous trait where it tends to be a little bit flighty. And, this is the blonde in all of us that have optimism drivers, right? It's very childlike by nature. And so the weak state of this driver is called immaturity. And this is where we see adult tantrums play out, right? It's like someone broke your toy in the sandbox, and then instead of just saying, hey, you broke my toy, can we talk about it? You say, fine. And you take up all your toys in the sandbox and leave it and go somewhere else. And then, so this driver, those who are driven by this, has a natural propensity to be very absolutely, like, cut it off in the moment. I'm never talking to you again. Okay. Case in point, I was with an ex-girlfriend years ago, and I was sharing an idea that I had. And I was so excited, and it was fun, it was playful, and I shared this idea I had for something of another, right? And then she didn't laugh with me, she didn't play along with me, she looked at me and she goes, "It's like the stupidest idea I've ever heard." And in that moment, popped my balloon, throttled me into the weak state of my optimism driver, and I said, "Fine, I'm never going to share any more ideas with you ever again." Perfect example of a weak state of optimism. Doesn't make any sense. Very childlike, a little bit tantrumy. Guess what happened the next day? The beautiful thing about this driver, it's like a bouncing ball. The next day I said, "Oh, you know what? I have another idea."
It's a puppy dog. The eternal puppy dog. Oh,
okay.
Man. Yeah, that's why I always preface when I know I'm going to squash your optimism. I always get it out there and say, "Hey, I'm about to squash your optimism." But I do remember you telling me about that for the first time, and it made me have this gut check moment of like, "Oh crap, that's my entire life. I take my toys from the sandbox all too often."
Yeah, and sometimes the byproduct of that is that if you allow yourself to go into the weak state too much and make decisions from the weak state, this is a very big piece. When you the power of understanding your strong state and weak state is this: if you make sure you set a boundary to never make decisions from the weak state of your drivers, you will start making better and better decisions. It will be 180-degree difference in your life. So many people make decisions from the weak state of their drivers. What happens, for example, in optimism, if you're in the weak state and you're immature and you're starting to cut things off and you make a decision to cut off a relationship prematurely or cut off a dynamic prematurely, and you make a irreversible decision in that state, that's where regret and resentment comes in. That's when you come out of that state and you're like, crap, what did I do? Why did I do that? Right? And that's just for the optimism driver. All the other drivers have different byproduct and results if you decide you want to make a decision from the weak state of that driver.
I've never heard you say that before, and that's my favorite part of this whole episode. That makes so much sense.
And so I think one of the most powerful things that have changed people's lives with the mastery of motivational drivers is recognizing that if you set the boundary for yourself never make decisions from the weak state of any of your drivers. Okay, so that means you need to recognize your state. It's like, am I in a strong state or weak state of my drivers? Weak state? Okay, should I be really making any decisions right now? No, give yourself a pause, give yourself a break. Because if you have a history of making terrible decisions in your life, likely it's because you've been making decisions from a weak state of your drivers.
It's our new, we're going to make that a new company policy. Before any decision is made, everyone goes around the table. Are you in the strong state or the weak state?
Strong state, weak state, strong state, weak state, strong state, weak state, weak state. Okay, let's feed it right now. Go feed, come back.
Decision approved. All right, let's move on. There are so many drivers. You know, I was at least upfront with this episode. I said there's a lot. Yeah. So moving on.
And I was optimistic thinking that we could just blow through it, but we're almost there.
Yeah, because that's one of our pilot drivers. So
right, exactly.
Potato. My second favorite driver is humility. Next, talk to me about humility.
Because this is a driver that you spend a lot of time in. So humility driver is one of my favorite drivers because it is the most egoless of all the drivers. And yet it is such a critical, those with the humility driver are a critical part of humanity's future and evolution. Let me tell you why.
Say less. I'm flattered.
We often call the humility driver the ether. Okay. So what keeps this driver, what feeds this driver in the strength is the harmonious balance between spending time in the world with people and spending time alone. Any extreme of either will throttle this driver into the weak state. If you spend too much time with people, those of you with humility driver, if you look at your core stats and you go, oh yeah, I do have humility driver. Okay, so this will resonate with you. Anytime you spend too much time with people, you'll find yourself to start to shut down. Sometimes right there in front of people, you'll start to shut down and check out. And people will think you're being stuck up or being just not present. The reality is your ecosystem saying, okay, enough, I'm done. I need to be by myself now, right? But the slippery slope is on the other side. You spend too much time alone, it'll also put you in a weak state. And then it'll get too comfortable being alone. So there needs to be, and everybody has a different ratio of how much time they spend with people, how much time they spend alone. You have to look at the rest of your results to kind of understand what your dynamic is. But once you find that ratio, it is so important to honor that, because the weak state of this has the least amount of collateral damage as well, in the sense that it's about neglecting your own needs. You start to neglecting self-care, neglecting what it is. And so how it shows up sometimes is that people will text you and it takes you like weeks, if ever, to respond, right? If people send you an email, you don't respond for months, or whatever the case may be. Okay. That's when it's that extreme. That's when you know that you are actually in the weak state of your humility driver. And it's important that you manage that ratio a little bit better. Now, why I love this driver is because the nature of it showing up in the world is not about, hey, here's I'm in the world now, I'm the spotlight. We call it the ether because those with the humility driver have a natural ability to hold space for others to operate in their most optimal state. They create the oxygen and the ether in the world for others to thrive. That is the power of the humility driver. And so when we tell people they have that, we tell them it is critically important for you, not just you, because you'll neglect your own needs if you go into the weak state, but also for the future of humanity, that you show up in the world, but not to an extreme of either. Okay. And that's the humility driver right there. Okay. It's no desire to have the spotlight, no desire, but it's a really good listener, ability to hold space for others, ability to be a great host and interviewer. That all lives in that humility.
Yeah, I didn't fully realize the power of it because I live in it. But when we had our retreat in Scottsdale, Corey from our team, also very high humility, more humility than me, and he had to leave a day early or 2 days early. And the whole team, it was crazy. We noticed that there was just this gaping hole when he left, and I was like, "What is that?" So like we woke up and it just felt weird, and you were like, yeah, Corey left. That's the humility drive. That's the ether leaving the space. And I was like, whoa, that's crazy.
Yeah.
It was wild.
Yeah, it's powerful because those humility and this humility driver. So like, for example, in the regal trait, there only lives two drivers. There's creating order and there's humility. So if you think about the benevolent king or queen being able to propagate that ether throughout the entire kingdom, for a prosperous kingdom, right? And that's why humility lives there. Humility also lives in a variety of other traits, but it's expressed a little bit differently. For example, the humility that lives in the romantic trait is very much about being reclusive, right? So the ratio is more so about being reclusive than being out there, right? In the sympathetic trait, it's actually a combination of both. It's being out there and creating that space of safety for others, right? Of feeling safe, but also hibernation time, right? And it needs time to be alone as well, right? So yeah, it's really interesting, just depending on, and so that's why even though you may have the same driver as somebody else, you still have to go back and look at how your speaker box is designed, right? How your vehicle is designed, to see how it will uniquely express through how your traits are, right? So it's really fascinating. So there's just layers and layers to this. So because I want people to say like, oh, I have humility just like him. How come it's so different? Because you're a different human being, for one thing. You have different experiences of life that will actually contextually guide how that part of you expresses. And you have different traits. And even if you have the same traits, you have different volume of traits. We have twins take this, and we see very clear differences and unique differences that resonate with both of them. They're like, oh my God, this is how we know. And so we have parents who say, before I couldn't tell them apart, now I can tell, just because this technology has showed me the things that I focus on to understand the unique differences between those two.
Yeah, super cool. It's the operating manual for yourself in your pocket. And you can go ask, hi, what's your unique combination? How does this driver show up for me in the traits that I exhibit? So we'll dive more into that. But we're moving on to accomplishment, the accomplishment driver. What's
the accomplishment driver is not just your regular goal-getting driver. Okay, what drives this driver more than anything else is accomplishing big, grandiose goals. Okay, and so this driver is one of the most powerful drivers of all the drivers, in a sense that it has the nuclear force capability of achieving huge things. Okay, what throttles this driver into the weak state is when the observation of progression and growth and achieving those goals aren't visualized. So this is one of the strategies I tell the people who have accomplishments drivers: make sure you have milestones in place so you can celebrate the progression, so you can see that you are hitting those big goals, right? And also avoid making any achievement diminishing the value of it, right? And so what happens a lot of time, because it's so powerful, it tends to go in, when it goes into the weak state is called intimidation. So we see this a lot with people who have been known in the space, especially the social, political, media space, of achieving big things and having big goals. You'll notice when they're in the weak state, they become very intimidating. And how we define intimidating to be is a behavior that puts the party that you're directing it towards in a state of defense. Like they feel like they need to defend themselves. That's how we define the intimidation as the weak state. So if you happen to have this as a driver, just know that you have the ability to really achieve some amazing things in this lifetime, right? Just got to watch yourself that if you don't give yourself the credit for making progress and hitting those milestones and diminishing what you've achieved, you may come off to try to intimidate the world around you in the effort to help you achieve that what you are not recognizing you're achieving.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to compassion next. The compassion driver.
Compassion is another one of those isolated nuclear force drivers that only lives in a trait, and the only trait that it lives in is the absorptive trait. Okay. Now, the compassion driver is interesting because, again, going out to the guru world and even the Dalai Lama I love, it's like, the world needs more compassion. Yes, people need compassion. Here's the thing. If someone doesn't have authentic access to the absorptive trait, pushing them to be compassionate will have them, especially if they have optimism as well, will have them pretending that they care and pretending to be compassionate. Again, we can be taught and trained to behave in a way that appears to be compassionate, but to be truly authentic compassion. And you know what that feels like, because most of us, when we encounter someone who is authentically compassionate, it feels very different than someone that just goes through the motion, doing what society thinks they should be doing to be compassionate, right? A lot of these influencers online that do things and it's like, oh, they play out these scenarios, but they're not really all that compassionate. I could look at their vehicle and it's like, you don't have that in you. Okay. But compassion is driven and fed in the strength by the being able to help another living thing, be it plant, animal, or human. Human beings obviously get fed more when they're helping another human being, but if they can't, we always make sure, like a lot of people who get older and they don't have as many people around them, but they have an abundance and they are driven by compassion, we say, get a pet. Especially if you lose a significant other as you get older, but you have compassion. A lot of times you see this happen. One significant other passes away, the other one is driven by compassion, and they don't do something. It's not to replace a human being, but they don't give themselves an ability to feed their compassion driver because they've been feeding it all their lives with that significant other. And shortly thereafter, the other half passes away too. So what we always recommend is that those are the compassion driver. You have to make sure that you are, structuring your day of activities to make sure that you're always taking care of another human being. It was really interesting. I was an ex-girlfriend of mine who had compassion driver. And this is before I learned this technology. And I'm very independent. And I didn't realize that every time she asked me, is there anything that she could do to help me? If there's anything that she could do, can she make, a meal for me? Can you make a snack for me? Whatever the case may be. Not realizing that she was literally trying to feed her compassion driver, and me being so independent, like, I'm good. No, don't trouble yourself. And then it would throttle her into the weak state. Now, the weak state is when the compassion driver can't help another human being or can't help somebody else, it turns inward. And what it looks like in the human context, it goes inward and it turns into woe is me, a little bit of a self-pity. So how you hear that is the language. Why does this always happen to me? Why are you doing this to me? Me. There's a lot of me language, right? And so when I learned about that, and I said, holy cow, this whole time I've been starving my partner every time she's been trying to feed herself by helping me, right?
Man,
So
you're
then I
such a
tried it.
jerk, way.
I know. And so I tried it. I stopped being so independent. And now this is not to say like you need to be in a codependent environment, but like when I said, hey, I need some help with this Excel sheet. I know you're really good at this. You love doing pivot tables all day long. Can you help me with it? She goes, oh my God. She was lit up for days working on this project because she knew it was going to help me ultimately at the end. And one of my other companies, she ended up helping me a lot in the operational side because she just loved doing that. That was her jam, not my jam. But because what was driving her was the fact that she knew that when it was done, that she would be helping me on some level. And what feeds that is the acknowledgement that the help was done. Okay, it's a little bit different than aesthetic sensibility, which is we'll talk about in a second. But this is like recognition that help was done, like acknowledge, like saying, oh my God, thank you so much. Appreciation for the help that was done, so that it doesn't go like unchecked, and then she goes, oh, I didn't help anything, and it gets distorted and turns into, yeah, look at me, I'm just a useless person, right? And that would be the compassion driver. I mean, there's other things too, but that's a little bit in a nutshell.
It's a tease. It's a good little tease. Guess who can tell you more? I can tell you
Bye.
more. But we got 3 left. We're almost sort of at the end, maybe, but we're gonna get there. This is awesome. We're diving way deeper than I thought we were going to, but I actually like this. So the next one is the traveler driver, spontaneity.
Right? Also known as no, actually, the traveler is actually detachment. Now, one would think, one might not think detachment is a driver, but that's actually the strength of this driver, is the ability to, and we call it traveler because people who have this as a driver, they love to travel. Why? It's kind of like the varietal driver. It's the driver that thrives in the spice of variety of life, right? And we call it detachment because in order to be able to go try something new, go to a new destination all the time, there's a level of detachment that needs to be there, which is a strength. Why it's a strength is because you don't get attached so that it becomes distortion, which is interesting because it's right next to the compassion driver that has a propensity to be a little bit more attached to things, right? The detachment driver is actually the antithesis to the creating order. They do not thrive in a orderly environment, a routine environment. These are the types of people that will like to drive a different way home, or so they say, get lost on the way home every day, right? Every week they want to try a different restaurant. Every year when they go on vacation, they don't never go to the same place twice, right? Those who embrace this and honor this, they find themselves in vocations and careers that take them all over the world, so they get to experience new things all the time while in the context of doing the work that they do. Outside salespeople that are never tied to a home base, those are people sometimes when they realize like, hey, I'd rather do that. Why? Because it's new, it's different, I get to travel all the time. Now, what happens if things get too routine and they're forced to attach themselves and they're not able to experience variety in their life? That's where the detachment goes into the weak state, which is deprivation. Now, unlike the neglect and humility, which is neglecting your own needs, deprivation in the detachment or the traveler driver is all about depriving your presence from the people in your life. You literally just disappear on them. Right.
That's really interesting. I always thought, I don't have this, as you could tell. I always thought detachment was the weak state of this driver, but the way you explained it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it's actually a strength of theirs. So their ability to not be attached. Okay, so you remember the way to help people heal is sympathetic, for example, the sympath. Okay, because it actually lives in a sympathetic as well as the absorptive. The sympath is the natural born healer as opposed to the empath. The empath gets attached and feels what the other person feeling, and a lot of people say, oh, I'm an empath, I'm a healer. It's like, actually the sympath is more of a healer. Why? Because there's a level of detachment that is necessary to be able to effectively hold space for people so that they can heal. If you get attached, you become part of the problem sometimes, right? it's like the person that's like in the water and they're drowning, the person that has an empath will jump in first, and they'll realize now they're both drowning, but I feel what you're feeling, that type of thing. The sympath, of course, will say, okay, great, well, let's throw in the life vest, throw in the floaties, and give me a floatie as well, and then I'll jump in. Or sometimes not even jump in, just maybe not jump in. The sympath will just be like, okay, hold still, throws the ring, lands on them, pulls them in. I don't know, whatever. But anyway,
turned a life-saving rescue into a carnival game.
Yeah, exactly. You're the winner. But yeah, so that's the detachment or traveler driver right there.
I love it. All right, 2 left. Aesthetic sensibility. You just hinted at this one. Talk to me about it.
Yeah, aesthetic sensibility is my pilot driver. So aesthetic sensibility is kind of like what it sounds. It's about creating beauty in the world. Now, creating beauty is very subjective. How one creates beauty or one defines as beauty is different. So however, if you have this as a driver, take the time to understand what beauty means to you. Like for me, it's like creating this beautiful tech setup or tech stack for a solution that will help you. So what happens is those with aesthetic sensibility, creating beauty, sharing your knowledge, sharing your gifts, presenting to others, some of the most prolific speakers and presenters in the world, and even actors and everything, have this as a driver. Okay. It is aesthetics about being able to present well into the world. The byproduct of presenting, sharing your gifts and everything of that into the world, creating beauty in the world, is what feeds this driver in the strength. The key word is byproduct, and the byproduct is called warranted acknowledgement. It's also known as attention, right? So the byproduct is the key there. The reason why I say the key word is byproduct, because the weak state is when you take away that the keyword of byproduct, and getting warranted acknowledgement or getting attention becomes the main goal. That's when you're in the weak state of aesthetic sensibility, is when you find yourself doing things just to get warranted acknowledgement, as opposed to creating something in the world or sharing something to the world, and the byproduct just happens to be that you get some acknowledgement for it. Okay, it's a very subtle shift that a lot of people have a hard time sometimes recognizing, but when you do, you're like, ooh. And how is that your internal language is I, or even your express language is I this, I that, I this. When you make it about I, that's so when you know.
What was me and I is the distinction between the self-pity and this. Yeah, okay.
Exactly. So the word me, and I. So it's interesting because I have this as a driver, and my ex had the compassion. So in the strength, it's very complementary. In the strength, it's the compassion wants to give the warranted acknowledgement to the aesthetic sensibility. In the weak state, it is one of the most incompatible ones, because it's all about me and it's all about I, me, and nobody is thinking about the other person, right?
Oh, that sounds like fun fights.
Yeah. It's like, what is happening here, right?
Now, this is the one driver too that every human being needs access to.
Some volume on it.
Why is that?
Because if you think about it, what happens to an infant when it comes into the world and gets zero attention?
Not good things.
Yeah, the infant basically dies, right? Yep. And most infants of the animal kingdom, and even some in the plant kingdom or any living thing on the planet, when there's a lack of attention, right, it will wither and it will die. And this is why, out of all the drivers, this is the only one that has to have a minimum volume of 1 or more. If it has a 0 there, which you can see, well, you wouldn't be able to see it on your core stats, but high can see it on the back end. If there's a 0 there, then there's something going on that is contributing to fatigue, right? And so that goes into deeper strategies of how high can actually help you optimize your life if that is something that is happening on the back end. And a lot of times, how you may think, why you would even use up a token to ask high about that, or use up a credit, is because if you are recognizing that you are feeling fatigue because you are dying for acknowledgement or appreciation or just any kind of out to in energy of recognition for anything, whether it be in home dynamic, work dynamic, or anything like that. And it's palpable. Okay. If you don't have that as an issue, it's not a common thing. But when it's there, you can hear it in that you tend to live life in a very self-absorbed way, which is the weak state of that aesthetic sensibility driver. It's called self-absorption.
And I would say this too. If you had a 0 there, we are a people first company, and someone on our team, usually me, will look at every single grid. I've never seen a 0 come through. Someone would have reached out to you, because just on a human being level, like, we care. That's something to be concerned about. So
and Hai will tell you also
Yeah.
in your 90-day optimization plan, it is one of the top flags that when Hai sees that, Hai will structure your 90-day optimization plan and give you a plan to remedy that. So make sure that you do pay attention to your 90-day optimization plan, because it's different for everyone. Unless both of you are having the same exact struggles in terms of whatever's going on in your ecosystem, right? Then it might be a little bit similar, but as time goes on, it's going to shift from one season to the next.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's round out the 12. The perseverance driver is the last on the list.
Yep. The perseverance driver is pretty straightforward. It's a very popular driver in the US. It's a very complementary driver to the creating order. If you think about what creating order is able to do, creating order is able to make to-do lists and those types of things, create systems and processes. Perseverance is the driver that is all about getting things done. It's where the taskmaster lives in the doing traits. And it only lives in the doing traits, whether it be the energetic or the romantic trait. Okay. So the perseverance driver in the strong state is all about getting things done with the byproduct of moving the needle forward. Okay. How it gets into the weak state is when there's a perception that the needle isn't moving forward, or you yourself are stopping the needle, putting the needle forward by being fatigued, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, and you're digging your heels in. And the weak state of the perseverance driver is the opposite of forward momentum. It's called stubborn, right? So anybody who has access to this, you'll know what I'm talking about. You'll know when you have that stubborn streak going. Just know the longer you stay there, the more energy it's going to take. And if you think about all the times that you persisted at being stubborn and just holding your ground and putting your foot down and not stepping away and tabling time and just kind of like, square peg in a round hole type of dynamic, when you were done, you were likely completely exhausted. Right. And so the easy solution for that is that when you catch yourself being stubborn, when you catch yourself digging your heels in, table it. And this is one of the only drivers I'll say as a strategy, get really good at tabling concepts and ideas where you feel yourself like kind of hitting the brick wall. Because of the perseverance driver, there's a natural propensity to come back. And you'll notice, so sometimes, a lot of times when you table something, you'll leave and you'll come back and it's kind of resolved itself. That lives in that unique dynamic and the energy of like what that nuclear force provides. And so any other driver, I may or may not, depending. Like the traveler driver, I will never say table it, because then it'll never get done and they'll just go off and go over to somewhere else. Perseverance driver, I don't have a problem. I have no problem saying, hey, just table that and come back to it later, because that perseverance nuclear force that drives you will bring you back. But the cool thing is when you table it and you come back, you'll come back. Obviously, if you go persevere somewhere else and you get your energy back up, you'll have a different focus. You'll have a different perspective on things, and you'll come back and it'll seem like it basically solved itself. Right.
Yeah. This driver always makes me laugh a little bit. My wife has it. I believe it's a tertiary driver for her. She's one of those people where if she does something, she will go back and write the to-do list of the things she's already done just to check them off. And she gets so happy. That feeds her driver.
That literally is one of the best ways to feed it. I have a really funny story. I had a client who had this as a pilot driver, and it was really, I mean, she needed to live and die by her to-do list. And she goes, oh my God, you're so right. And I said, just checking things off gives you a little jolt of energy. And then she goes, you're right. Let me do more of that. And then so a week or so goes by, and then she comes back for her next session. And then she sits down, she goes, wait, I got to tell you something. Oh my God. I mean, I sort of knew that this was important to me and people made fun of me. Now I can totally own it. I'm telling you, checking things off and writing things out, checking it out. It's like, and she was so like energized by it. It's like, it's almost better than sex. And I was like, whoa, I don't know if I would have said. She goes, no, I said almost. I was like, all right. But it was that energizing for her. It just lit her up so much. And that was her main pilot driver. She had a significant volume there. She had a lot of volume in her doing traits as well, primarily in the energetic. And it was really kind of a cool feedback to observe of her talking about just the simple act of crossing things off a checklist. It was like energy.
And this is how the HumanOp technology can help take your life to the next level, because for her husband, he just needs to put sex on the to-do list, and boom, just like that, they both win.
And at the end, instead of like pulling out a cigarette, honey, check it off.
Check it off the list. How many people do you know that pull out a cigarette after sex? What
I don't know. That's a 50-60 thing, I think. I don't know. Whatever. It was an old school meme. Okay, fine. I'm old.
Okay, whatever. Fine. Look at that. I just squashed his optimism. All right, I'm done with this episode now.
I'm done.
Well, this episode fed my drivers. I'm jacked up. Let's go record 12 more. This was a lot. This was a lot to take in.
Yeah.
What do we do? I made you sit through the pop quiz last time on the last episode. What are we gonna go and prompt high with based on this episode talking about motivational drivers?
One of the easiest things you could do, and if you're not sure how best to do it, because like everything else in the world right now with the whole AI industry, HumanOp Authentic Intelligence Engine is same thing there. If you put garbage in, it's going to garbage out. If you ask questions that are going to lead to results that are actually helpful for you, don't ask it. Don't waste the credit on it, okay? Instead, look at your driver, and if you're struggling with figuring out what activities you could do, give some good context. Like, I work in such and such industry, and I'm wondering what is it that I can do every day in my industry to feed my aesthetic sensibility driver, or to feed my humility driver, or to feed any of your drivers, but just make sure you pick, well, you can only pick that on your core stats. Make sure you pick your pilot and your co-pilot. Get masterful at that. Start to create a whole repository of activities that are unique to you, that you know in a pinch that if you do it, it will bring energy to you. And this is how you never run out of motivation. This is how you access uniquely for you limitless motivation.
That sounds fun. I want more of that. We'll teach you how to get more of that. Go prompt high with that question. Next episode, we're going to dive deep into prompting high, different ways to get the most out of your results within the app. And then we'll come back, analyze the grid and the results. We'll dive into alchemy. So quick break from the breakdown of all the different components of the app, but we'll be back in a couple of weeks. Thanks for listening to another episode of Running with Scissors. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Running with Scissors. Have you downloaded the HumanOp app yet? Head over to humanop.com to experience the power of this technology for yourself. See you on the next episode of Running with Scissors.